I want to be completely transparent with you. You've been clicking on that feeling in your chest, that racing thought in your mind, that pit in your stomach, and you've been trying to push it away, control it, medicate it, distract yourself from it, and fight it with every ounce of willpower you have. And I'm here to tell you something that might sound absolutely crazy at first, but stay with me, because this could change everything. You've been doing it completely backwards. What if I told you that the very act of fighting your anxiety is actually making it stronger? What if the solution that monks discovered thousands of years ago, living in silence on mountaintops and in monastery walls, is the exact opposite of everything our modern world has taught us about dealing with fear and worry? In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you an approach that seems counterintuitive, that might even make you uncomfortable at first, but has the power to fundamentally transform your relationship with anxiety forever. So if you're tired of the constant battle, if you're exhausted from trying technique after technique, only to find yourself back at square one when that familiar wave of panic hits, then what I'm about to share with you might be exactly what you've been searching for. Let me start by telling you about a conversation I had with a Buddhist monk who spent 15 years in a monastery in the mountains of Tibet. I asked him how monks deal with anxiety, with fear, with the racing thoughts that keep ordinary people like us up at night. And his answer stopped me dead in my tracks. He smiled and said, "We don't deal with it, we welcome it." At first I thought he was being poetic or speaking in some kind of spiritual riddle, but as he explained further, I realized he was describing something profoundly practical and deeply radical. He told me that in the monastery, when a monk experiences anxiety, they're taught to do something that would sound absolutely insane to most people in our culture. They're taught to bow to it, to literally stop what they're doing and acknowledge the anxiety as if it were an honored guest arriving at their door. Not to fight it, not to push it away, not to distract themselves with work or entertainment or substances, but to actually turn toward it with curiosity and even gratitude. Now, before you close this video thinking this is some kind of mystical nonsense, let me explain the profound psychological truth that underlies this practice, because what monks understood through centuries of inner exploration, modern neuroscience is now confirming through brain scans and clinical research. You see, anxiety isn't actually the problem. I know that sounds crazy when you're in the middle of a panic attack or you can't sleep because your mind won't stop spinning worst-case scenarios, but hear me out. Anxiety is a symptom, a messenger, a signal from your nervous system that's trying to tell you something important. And when you fight it, when you treat it as an enemy that needs to be destroyed, you're essentially declaring war on a part of yourself. And here's the thing about fighting a part of yourself: you can never win. Because every time you push anxiety away, every time you try to control it, or suppress it, or distract yourself from it, you're actually sending a message to your brain that this feeling is dangerous, that it's something to be afraid of, which creates more anxiety about having anxiety. It's like being afraid of being afraid, and it creates this vicious cycle that just spirals and spirals. Think about it this way. Have you ever tried to not think about a pink elephant? The moment someone tells you not to think about a pink elephant, what happens? Your mind immediately conjures up an image of a pink elephant. The same principle applies to anxiety. When you tell yourself, "I shouldn't be anxious," or "I need to calm down," or "Why can't I just relax?" you're actually amplifying the very thing you're trying to eliminate. This is what psychologists call the paradox of control. The more you try to control your internal experiences, the less control you actually have. Monks figured this out centuries ago without the benefit of brain imaging technology or clinical trials. They discovered through direct experience that resistance amplifies suffering, while acceptance transforms it. But let's be clear about what acceptance means, because this is where most people get confused, and where the monastic approach differs radically from how we typically think about dealing with problems. Acceptance doesn't mean liking your anxiety or wanting it to stick around. It doesn't mean being passive or giving up or resigning yourself to a life of constant worry. Acceptance in the monastic sense means acknowledging what's actually happening in this moment without adding layers of judgment, resistance, or story on top of it. It means being willing to feel what you're feeling without needing to change it, fix it, or make it go away. This might sound like a subtle distinction, but it's actually the difference between freedom and perpetual struggle. Let me tell you what actually happens in your brain and body when you shift from fighting anxiety to accepting it. When you're in fight mode with your anxiety, your sympathetic nervous system is activated. This is your body's stress response system. Your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, lights up and starts sending signals throughout your body. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense up. Stress hormones like cortisol and adrenaline flood your system. And here's the kicker. Your prefrontal cortex, the rational thinking part of your brain, starts to go offline. This is why when you're really anxious, you can't think clearly. You can't access the logical part of your brain that knows everything is probably going to be okay. You're essentially hijacked by your primitive survival brain that's designed to keep you alive when you're facing a genuine threat. Except in most modern cases of anxiety, there's no actual tiger chasing you. The threat is imagined or vastly overestimated. Now, when you practice the monastic approach of turning toward anxiety with acceptance and curiosity, something remarkable happens in your neurobiology. First, by consciously choosing to observe your anxiety rather than react to it, you're activating your prefrontal cortex, bringing the rational, aware part of your brain back online. Second, by approaching your internal experience with an attitude of openness rather than resistance, you're beginning to activate your parasympathetic nervous system, which is your body's rest and digest response, the counterbalance to the stress response. Your breathing naturally begins to deepen, your heart rate starts to regulate, and most importantly, you're sending a signal to your amygdala that you're safe, that this sensation, however uncomfortable, is not actually a threat to your survival. Over time, with repeated practice, you're actually rewiring the neural pathways in your brain, weakening the connection between certain triggers and the anxiety response, and strengthening your capacity to be present with discomfort without being overwhelmed by it. But here's where the monastic wisdom goes even deeper than modern psychology often does. Monks don't just accept anxiety, they investigate it. They get curious about it. They ask questions like, where do I feel this in my body? What's the actual physical sensation beneath the thought pattern I'm calling anxiety? Is it a tightness in my chest, a fluttering in my stomach, a tension in my shoulders? By getting specific and granular about the actual sensory experience, something magical happens. The monolithic thing we label as anxiety begins to break apart into individual, manageable sensations that come and go, rise and fall, like waves in the ocean. And when you observe a wave, really observe it, you notice that it doesn't stay at peak intensity forever. Every sensation, no matter how intense, has a natural arc. It rises, it peaks, and it passes. But when you're fighting it, you never get to experience this natural resolution because you're so busy trying to make it go away that you never actually allow it to complete its cycle. There's a practice in many monastic traditions called noting or mental noting, where you simply acknowledge what's arising in your experience without getting caught up in the story about it. So instead of, "Oh my God, I'm having anxiety, this is terrible. Why is this happening again? I thought I was getting better. There must be something wrong with me. Maybe I need different medication. Maybe I should cancel my plans. What if I have a panic attack in public?" All of that mental proliferation that turns one anxious thought into an avalanche. Instead, you simply note anxiety, or even more specifically, tight chest, racing thoughts, worry about the future. You're naming what's happening without adding commentary or judgment or trying to change it. This simple act of noting creates a little bit of space between you and the experience. You're no longer fused with the anxiety. You're the awareness that notices anxiety arising. This is what monks mean when they talk about developing observer consciousness or witnessing awareness. You're cultivating the ability to observe your inner weather without believing that you are the weather. You're not the anxiety any more than the sky is the clouds passing through it. The sky remains vast and unchanging, whether the clouds are dark and stormy or light and fluffy. And when you can identify more with the awareness that observes anxiety rather than the anxiety itself, you've fundamentally shifted your relationship with it. It's no longer this overwhelming force that takes over your entire being. It's a temporary experience arising in consciousness, something you're having but not something you are. Now I know what you might be thinking. This sounds good in theory, but how do I actually do this when I'm in the grip of intense anxiety? How do I turn towards something that feels so overwhelming and threatening? And this is where the monastic approach offers some incredibly practical techniques. The first thing monks emphasize is working with the breath, but not in the way you might think. They're not trying to use the breath to calm down or make the anxiety go away. That would be fighting it again. Instead, they're using the breath as an anchor, a steady reference point that's always available, always happening in the present moment. When you're anxious, your mind is almost always spinning stories about the future. What might happen? What could go wrong? What if scenarios on endless loop? The breath brings you back to now, to the only moment where life is actually happening, the only moment where you have any real power. Here's a simple practice you can do right now, and I encourage you to actually try this, not just understand it intellectually, because the transformation happens in the direct experience, not in the concept. Notice where you feel your breath most prominently. Maybe it's the cool air moving through your nostrils. Maybe it's the rise and fall of your chest. Maybe it's the expansion and contraction of your belly. Pick one spot and rest your attention there. You're not trying to breathe in any special way. You're just noticing the breath as it naturally is. And then, and this is the key, when you notice anxiety arising, when you notice the worried thoughts starting to spin, instead of getting frustrated or trying to push them away, you simply acknowledge anxiety is here and gently return your attention to the breath. Not to make the anxiety go away, but just to give your attention something to rest on besides the anxious story. You might need to return your attention to the breath 100 times in 5 minutes, and that's not failure. That's the practice. Each time you notice you've been swept away by anxious thoughts, and you choose to come back to the breath, you're strengthening your capacity to be present, to not be completely hijacked by every worry that arises. Another practice monks use that's incredibly powerful is what's called loving kindness toward the anxiety itself. This might sound really weird at first, but stay with me. When anxiety arises, instead of treating it like an enemy, you actually speak to it with kindness. The way you might speak to a frightened child. You might place your hand on your heart and say something like, "I know you're trying to protect me. I know you're scared. It's okay. You're safe. I'm here with you." Safe. This isn't about being sappy or bypassing the real distress you are feeling. It's about recognizing that anxiety is fundamentally a protective mechanism, an attempt by your nervous system to keep you safe, even if it's firing off when there's no real danger. When you meet it with hostility and judgment, you're creating an internal war. When you meet it with compassion, you're creating the conditions for it to relax, to not have to work so hard. Research in neuroscience has shown that self-compassion practices actually activate the caregiving system in the brain, the same neural circuits that are activated when a mother responds to her baby's cry. This system releases oxytocin and other calming neurochemicals that directly counteract the stress response. So by speaking kindly to yourself in moments of anxiety, you're not just being nice, you're literally changing your brain chemistry in a way that helps you feel safer and more resourced. Monks have known this experientially for millennia, and now we have the scientific data to back up what they discovered through inner exploration. But perhaps the most radical thing monks understand about anxiety is that it often arises when we're disconnected from the present moment and lost in mental stories about who we are and who we should be. So much of anxiety is fueled by what Buddhist psychology calls the comparing mind, the constant evaluation of how we measure up, whether we're good enough, whether we're doing enough, whether we're safe enough, whether we're successful enough, whether we're loved enough. This comparing mind is exhausting, and it generates endless anxiety because there's always something or someone to compare yourself to. There's always a way you could be doing better or different. Monks practice letting go of these comparisons, not by trying to stop comparing, that would just be another form of fighting, but by recognizing the thoughts as thoughts, not as truth, not as reality, just as mental events arising and passing in awareness. There's a famous Zen story about a monk who asks his teacher, "How do you deal with anxiety?" And the teacher responds, "When I'm hungry, I eat. When I'm tired, I sleep." The student is confused. "But teacher, doesn't everyone do that?" And the teacher says no. When most people eat, they're thinking about 1,000 other things. When they sleep, they're worrying about tomorrow. They're never fully present for the activity they're actually engaged in. This is the essence of the monastic approach, bringing full attention to whatever is happening right now, whether that's washing dishes or walking, or yes, even experiencing anxiety. When you're fully present with anxiety, when you're actually feeling it in your body rather than thinking about it in your head, it transforms. It's the thinking about the anxiety, the story about what it means, the worry about when it will end, that creates the suffering. Let me give you a concrete example. Imagine you have to give a presentation at work and you start feeling anxious. The conventional approach that most of us are taught is to try to calm ourselves down, maybe take some deep breaths, try to think positive thoughts, tell ourselves it's going to be fine, maybe even take medication to suppress the anxiety. And sometimes these things help in the short term, but they don't change the underlying pattern. The monastic approach would be radically different. You would first acknowledge anxiety is here. Then you would get curious about what the anxiety actually feels like in your body. Maybe there's a shakiness, maybe your stomach is tight, maybe your mind is racing. You would allow these sensations to be exactly as they are without trying to change them. You might place a hand on your heart and say, "It's okay to be nervous, this is a moment of stress. May I be kind to myself in this moment?" And then, and this is crucial, you would shift your attention from the anxious thoughts about the presentation to the actual task at hand, preparing, practicing, eventually delivering the presentation. You're not trying to get rid of the anxiety before you do the thing. You're willing to do the thing with the anxiety present. This is what monks call non-attachment or non-resistance. You're not attached to feeling a certain way before you take action. You're willing to feel anxious and still do what matters to you. And here's what's paradoxical and beautiful about this. When you're willing to feel anxious and take action anyway, when you stop waiting for the anxiety to go away before you live your life, the anxiety often naturally diminishes because you're no longer feeding it with all your attention and resistance. But even if it doesn't diminish, even if the anxiety stays, you're free because your life isn't on hold waiting for some future moment when you'll finally feel calm enough to do the things you care about. You're living now with whatever is present, including anxiety. This brings us to another crucial aspect of the monastic approach that's often misunderstood in popular culture. When we hear about monks meditating in silence, we sometimes imagine they're escaping from the world, avoiding difficulties, retreating into some kind of blissful state where nothing bothers them. But the reality is exactly the opposite. Monks intentionally sit with discomfort, with boredom, with pain, with anxiety, with all the stuff that the rest of us are constantly trying to avoid through entertainment, distraction, substances, busyness. They're not doing this because they are masochists who enjoy suffering. They're doing it because they've discovered that the only way to freedom is through, not around. They've learned that every time you avoid discomfort, you make the zone of what you can handle smaller. Every time you're willing to be present with discomfort, you expand your capacity, you become more resilient, more stable, less fragile. Think about it. Our entire modern culture is designed around avoiding discomfort. Feel bored? Scroll your phone. Feel lonely? Check social media. Feel anxious? Watch Netflix, have a drink, go shopping. Do anything to not feel the feeling. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with entertainment or occasional distraction, but when avoidance becomes your primary coping strategy, you're training your nervous system that these feelings are dangerous, that you can't handle them, that they need to be escaped. Monks train the opposite capacity, the ability to stay present with whatever arises, trusting that you have the inner resources to meet each moment, even the uncomfortable ones. And this trust doesn't come from positive thinking or affirmations. It comes from the repeated direct experience of staying present with difficulty and discovering that you don't fall apart, that you're actually much more resilient than you thought. There's a beautiful practice in some monastic traditions where monks intentionally recall difficult experiences or imagine challenging scenarios, not to torture themselves, but to practice meeting difficulty with equanimity while they're in a relatively stable state. It's like emotional weight training. You're building strength by voluntarily working with resistance. So a monk might sit in meditation and intentionally bring to mind something that usually triggers anxiety, and then practice all the skills we've been talking about, accepting the feeling, investigating it with curiosity, meeting it with compassion, anchoring in the breath, not getting lost in the story. And over time, the things that used to completely overwhelm them start to have less power because they've practiced meeting them with presence instead of avoidance. Now, I want to address something really important because I think there's sometimes a misunderstanding that the monastic approach means you should never seek help, never take medication, never go to therapy, never make practical changes in your life to reduce stress. That's absolutely not what this is about. If you have clinical anxiety that's significantly impacting your functioning, please work with qualified healthcare providers. Medication can be life-saving for some people. Therapy can be incredibly helpful. Practical stress reduction techniques absolutely have their place. The monastic approach isn't instead of these things. It's a fundamental shift in your relationship with your inner experience that complements and enhances whatever other support you're receiving. You can take medication and also practice acceptance. You can be in therapy and also cultivate observer awareness. These things aren't mutually exclusive. What the monastic approach offers that's unique is a path to freedom that doesn't depend on your anxiety going away. It's not about eliminating anxiety, it's about liberating yourself from the suffering that comes from fighting anxiety, from the secondary layer of distress that we add on top of the primary experience. The anxiety itself might be a 4 out of 10 on the distress scale, but the panic about having anxiety, the shame about not being able to control it, the catastrophic thoughts about what it means, the fear that it will never end, that's what takes it to a 10. The monastic approach helps you work with those secondary reactions, that layer of suffering that we create through resistance and story. And when that drops away, even if the primary sensation of anxiety is still present, there's so much more space, so much less struggle. I want to share one more practice that monks use that I find incredibly powerful. It's called impermanence practice, or contemplation of change. The basic insight is that everything in your experience, every thought, every emotion, every sensation, is constantly changing, arising and passing away moment by moment. When you're gripped by anxiety, it feels solid, permanent, unchanging, like it will last forever. But if you actually pay close attention, you'll notice that the anxiety itself is made up of many different sensations and thoughts that are constantly in flux. The tightness in your chest might intensify for a moment, then soften slightly, then intensify again. The worried thoughts might speed up, then slow down, then shift to a different worry. Nothing is as solid and unchanging as it seems when you're fused with the experience. By bringing awareness to the changing nature of your experience, you're loosening the grip of the belief that I am anxious, and moving toward the recognition that anxiety is currently present in my experience, and it's already beginning to change. Monks often practice this by paying very close, detailed attention to physical sensations, noticing how they have a birth, a peak, and a dissolution, just like everything else in nature. You can try this right now. Bring your attention to any sensation in your body. Maybe a sensation of contact where your body meets the chair, and just watch it with granular attention. Notice how it's not really one solid sensation, but a field of changing sensations. Tingling, pressure, warmth, coolness, all in constant flux. This same principle applies to anxiety. What we label as one thing, anxiety, is actually a complex, changing symphony of sensations, thoughts, and reactions, none of which are permanent, all of which are in process. This realization is profoundly liberating because it means no state, however uncomfortable, is fixed. Everything is passing through, including this. So let me bring all of this together into something practical you can actually use. The next time you notice anxiety arising, try this sequence that integrates everything we've talked about. First, pause and acknowledge, anxiety is here. This is the moment of recognition, of turning toward rather than away. Second, locate the sensation in your body. Where do you actually feel this? Be specific. Third, describe the sensation without using emotional labels. Is it tight, fluttery, hot, heavy, buzzing? Just the raw physical experience. Fourth, breathe with it. Not to make it go away, but to give yourself a steady anchor while you're present with the discomfort. Fifth, speak to it with compassion. I know you're here. It's okay, I can be with this. Sixth, notice that it's changing, even subtle shifts from one moment to the next. And seventh, choose your action based on your values, not on whether the anxiety is gone. What matters to you in this moment? What action aligns with who you want to be? Do that with the anxiety present if necessary. This is the monastic path. Not fighting, not fixing, not making anxiety the enemy, but meeting each moment, including the anxious ones, with presence, curiosity, and compassion. It's simple, but it's not easy, and that's okay. Monks spend their entire lives practicing these skills, not because they're trying to reach some final destination where they never feel uncomfortable, but because they've discovered that the practice itself is the freedom. The capacity to be fully present with whatever is arising. That's what liberation actually means. Not a life without anxiety, but a life where anxiety is just one more weather pattern in the vast sky of your awareness, something that comes and goes without defining you, without limiting you, without controlling you. And here's the beautiful thing. You don't have to become a monk or go to a monastery or meditate for hours a day to access this freedom. You can start right now in this moment with whatever you're experiencing. You can practice bringing kind, curious attention to your inner experience instead of fighting it. You can practice being the sky instead of the clouds. You can practice living your life according to your values, instead of according to whether you feel anxious. Each moment is a new opportunity to practice, and each time you choose presence over avoidance, acceptance over resistance, compassion over judgment, you're rewiring your brain, you're training your nervous system, you're discovering your own resilience and capacity and strength. Not because the anxiety has gone away, but because you've stopped waiting for it to go away before you fully show up for your life. So I'll leave you with this invitation. What if you stopped fighting? What if you turned toward your anxiety with the same curiosity and compassion that a monk brings to their meditation practice? What if you discovered that the very thing you've been trying to escape is actually the doorway to freedom? Not freedom from discomfort, but freedom in the midst of discomfort. Not a life without anxiety, but a life where anxiety no longer has the power to stop you from being who you want to be and doing what matters to you. That's the invitation. That's the path. That's what monks have been practicing for centuries, and it's available to you right now.